The letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from my shift, propped up against the salt shaker like it had been waiting for me. My wife, Claire, was standing by the window with her arms crossed, not looking at me. That's how I knew it was bad before I even touched the envelope. It was from Meridian Property Group. We had 30 days. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down on the counter and stood there for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum. Claire finally turned around, and I could see her eyes were red. She'd been home for 2 hours already. 2 hours with that letter. 30 days, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. We'd been renting that apartment for 6 years. 6 years in Raleigh, in a neighborhood we actually liked, close enough to the elementary school that our daughter Maisie could walk. The building had been sold. That much we already knew. But the letter said Meridian was converting the entire complex to luxury residential units, and our lease would not be renewed under any circumstances. There was a number to call if we had questions. I called it twice. Both times it rang through to a voicemail that was full. I was 31 years old, working as an HVAC technician, and my wife taught 3rd grade. We weren't broke, but we weren't anywhere close to what Raleigh had become, price-wise. The median home price in the area had crossed $420,000 that spring. I looked it up that night after Maisie was in bed, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to do math that didn't add up no matter how I arranged the numbers. We had $11,000 in savings. Claire had been putting away a little from every paycheck for 3 years, building that up. $11,000 felt like a lot until the moment you needed it to mean something, and then it felt like almost nothing at all. For 2 weeks we looked at rentals. Everything decent in Raleigh was gone or priced for people making twice what we made. We drove 40 minutes north and looked at a duplex that had black mold along the baseboard in the bathroom. We drove 30 minutes east and looked at a house where the landlord couldn't tell us why the previous tenant had moved out suddenly in January. We looked at 4 apartments in 4 different towns, and every single one of them had something wrong with it, or was already taken by the time we called back. I was sitting in my truck one afternoon, eating a sandwich in a Home Depot parking lot between jobs, when I started looking at property listings on my phone. Not rentals. Actual properties. I don't know why I did it. I think I just wanted to see if it was theoretically possible. I typed in the county, set the max price at $90,000, and hit search expecting nothing. 43 results came back. Most of them were land only, or mobile homes in bad shape, or lots in flood zones. But buried on the 3rd page was a listing for a property about 65 miles northwest of Raleigh, up in Vance County near the Virginia border. 3 acres. A house described as habitable, with work. The listing price was $62,000, and it had been sitting on the market for 8 months. The photos were not encouraging. The house was a 1.5-story structure that appeared to be slowly losing an argument with gravity. The front porch sagged on one side. There was a photograph of the interior that showed water-stained walls, a kitchen with no cabinet doors, and a floor that buckled near the back wall. A handwritten note in the listing said the property included a detached well and a septic system of unknown condition. I texted the photos to Claire. She called me back in 4 minutes. "That's a tear down, maybe," I said. "The porch is literally falling off. We could fix a porch." There was a long pause. I could hear her classroom in the background, kids getting settled after lunch. "Come home tonight and let's talk," she said. "Really talk." That conversation lasted until almost midnight. We sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, the listing pulled up, a legal pad between us. Claire had written out our monthly expenses on one side and what our mortgage payment would be on the other, using the FHA loan calculator she'd found online. At $62,000 with 3.5% down, we were looking at payments under $500 a month. Our current rent was $1,400. "That's if it passes inspection," Claire said. "Right, and if the well works, right, and if the septic—" "I know," I said. "I know all the ifs. But look at the alternative." She looked at the legal pad. She looked at the laptop. She looked at me. "Okay," she said. "Let's go see it." The drive up was beautiful in a way neither of us had the emotional bandwidth to fully appreciate at the time. We went on a Saturday morning in late October, Maisie in the back seat, watching something on her tablet, with headphones on. The land up there is rolling and wooded tobacco country that's been transitioning for decades into something quieter. We turned off the state road onto a gravel lane, and the trees closed in on both sides, and then the house appeared at the end of a slight rise. It looked worse in person, which I had expected. The yard was chest-high in weeds. A section of the gutter had detached and hung down at an angle from the roofline. Two of the windows on the ground floor were covered in plywood, but the bones were there. I could see that immediately. Solid framing. A stone foundation that wasn't going anywhere. The roof had some damage, but the pitch was good, and the structure hadn't shifted. I'd worked construction for 2 years before I got my HVAC certification, and I knew what a house looked like when it was dying versus when it was just neglected. This one was neglected. Maisie climbed out of the car and looked at the house and said, "Are we buying this?" "We're thinking about it," Claire said. "It's spooky, a little bit. I like it," Maisie said, and walked toward it with the unearned confidence of a 7-year-old. The real estate agent, a local woman named Beverly who was cheerful about everything, in a way that I suspected came from long practice dealing with properties like this one, walked us through room by room. The kitchen was gutted. The bathroom had a functional toilet and a clawfoot tub that was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen, inexplicably intact and unscratched. The 2 bedrooms upstairs were small but had decent windows. The main room downstairs was large, with original hardwood floors under a layer of grime, and a massive stone fireplace centered on the south wall that Beverly said had been built by the original owner sometime in the 1940s. "Who was the original owner?" I asked. Beverly checked her folder. "Fellow named August Hale. Built it himself, apparently. Lived here till he passed in 1987. Property went to his son, then sat in an estate dispute for years. Finally got sorted and came to market." I stood in the main room and looked at that fireplace. It was extraordinary. Floor to ceiling, rough-cut granite blocks, a hearth wide enough that you could have fit a love seat inside it. It was the one thing in the house that seemed to have been cared for, maintained, even cleaned, while everything around it fell into ruin. We put in an offer that evening from Beverly's car in the driveway. $58,000 contingent on inspection. The estate accepted it 3 days later without countering. The inspection found what we expected and nothing worse. The well produced clean water at a good flow rate. The septic needed pumping but was structurally sound. The roof required significant repair on the north face. The electrical was old knob and tube in the walls that would need to be replaced before we could get insurance, but the panel itself had been updated at some point in the 90s. Beverly had a local electrician friend who could do the work for $3,800. We paid it. We moved in on a Thursday in December with a U-Haul and my brother-in-law's pickup truck in 38 degrees and a light rain. Maisie wore her raincoat and ran back and forth between the truck and the house with armfuls of stuffed animals like she was establishing a very important beachhead. Claire and I moved furniture until 9 at night. We made up our mattress on the bedroom floor because the bed frame was still in the truck, and we were too tired to go back out. The first night in that house, I lay there listening to the sounds it made. Old houses talk. This one creaked and settled and occasionally let out a sound from somewhere in the walls that I couldn't identify and chose not to investigate. Claire was asleep in 10 minutes. I stared at the ceiling for another hour. We spent the first 3 months on survival-level repairs. I rewired the north bedroom myself, legally, pulling a permit and having it inspected. We replaced the kitchen cabinets with stock units from the hardware store. I patched the roof with help from my neighbor up the road, a retired man named Arthur who showed up one Saturday morning with a ladder and a thermos of coffee and didn't ask for anything in return, just said he liked to keep busy. Claire sanded and refinished 600 square feet of hardwood floor over 2 weekends while Maisie stayed with her mother. It was during the fourth month, on a Tuesday in March, that I noticed something was wrong with the math of the house. I had been measuring the main room for baseboards. We were finally getting to the cosmetic work, and I wrote down the interior dimensions: 22 feet wide, 31 feet deep. Standard enough for a house of this era. But I had been outside that same morning checking the foundation for any new cracking after a hard freeze, and I had paced the exterior while I was out there. I went back outside with a tape measure. The exterior of the main floor, not counting the porch, measured 22 feet wide by 38 feet deep. I stood in the backyard with the tape measure in my hand and did the arithmetic twice. 7 feet were missing. I went back inside and walked the room again. The fireplace was at the south end. I walked north from the fireplace to the back wall, the wall that divided the main room from the small utility space and back door. I tapped on the wall, solid. I measured from the back of the fireplace to the back wall, 31 feet. Then I went outside and measured from the back exterior wall to the exterior front wall, 38 feet, 7 feet of interior space that didn't exist. I walked the utility area. It was a narrow pass-through, maybe 4 feet deep, running the full width of the house. It held the water heater and some shelving. 4 feet of utility space plus 31 feet of main room equaled 35 feet. The house was 38 feet deep. 3 feet were unaccounted for. I called Claire in from the kitchen. "Look at this," I said, and showed her the numbers. She frowned at the tape measure. "Maybe you measured wrong. I measured 4 times. We stood in the utility space together. The back wall was drywall, painted over so many times it had lost all texture. I pressed my palm flat against it. It felt, not hollow exactly, but less substantial than the exterior walls. What if it's just insulation?" Claire said. 3 feet of insulation. She didn't have an answer for that. I went out to the truck and came back with a stud finder. I ran it along the back wall of the utility space. It found studs at regular intervals, which was normal. But when I ran it along the side wall, the east wall of the utility space, it found nothing. No studs, no resistance, like running a stud finder along air. "There's a room back there," I said. Claire looked at me. "You're serious. The east wall of this utility space is hollow. The exterior east wall of the house is solid brick and stone. There's a 3-foot gap between them. A room isn't 3 feet wide." "No," I said, "but a door might be. A door, and then whatever's on the other side of it." We went outside and walked the east side of the house. The exterior wall there was original stone, the same rough granite as the fireplace. There was no door visible, no window. The foundation plantings, overgrown boxwoods that we hadn't gotten around to trimming, ran along the base of the wall. I pulled one back with my hand and looked at the foundation level. The stone was different there. A 6-foot section of the lower wall, just above the foundation line, was granite that had been mortared in with slightly newer mortar than the surrounding sections. The color was close, but not identical. Someone had sealed something in, or sealed something out. I said, "August Hale built this house himself." "Yeah," Claire said. "In the 1940s, Dob, right." We looked at each other. I spent 2 days working carefully. I didn't want to damage anything structural, so I started from the inside, removing the drywall panel by panel in the utility space. Behind it was a layer of older plaster, and behind that was a wood-framed interior wall, and behind that wall, revealed when I removed a section of the framing, was a door. It was a simple pine door, 3 feet wide, fitted into the stone exterior wall with handmade iron hardware. It had a hasp latch, no lock. It was sealed with decades of paint along the frame, and when I worked a putty knife around the edge and then pulled, it opened with a sound like something releasing a long-held breath. Claire was standing behind me with a flashlight. I took it from her hand. The space on the other side was not 3 feet wide. It was a full room, roughly 8 feet by 12, with a stone floor and stone walls and a low ceiling of old planking. It smelled of earth and time. Old tin cans on a wooden shelf, a rusted hand pump in the corner, a wooden cot frame with no mattress. And against the far wall, set directly into the stone, a steel door, roughly 2 feet square with a mechanical combination dial. Claire made a sound next to me that I don't have an exact word for. Not fear, not excitement. something between them. A safe, I said, built into the wall. He built this room, and then he built a safe into the wall of it. We stood there in the cold of that old room, and I swept the flashlight around it slowly. The tin cans on the shelf were old preserves, dried out to nothing. There was a folded canvas on the cot frame, probably an old tarp. There was a mason jar on the shelf with coins in it, old pennies and nickels, the kind with low silver content that people used to hoard during the war years. And there was the safe. I tried the dial, stiff but functional. I had no combination. I didn't know what August Hale might have considered memorable enough to use as a combination in 1940s rural North Carolina. I tried a few obvious things. His birth year, which Beverly found for me in the property records, 1911. I tried 1911, 1911, combinations in both directions. Nothing. I tried the year the house was built, 1944, in various configurations. Nothing. I spent an evening online reading about this specific type of older mechanical safe. I found a forum where people who dealt in antique safes discussed the common manufacturer defaults for mid-century American units. One contributor mentioned that a common default on York Safe and Lock Company units from that era was 1020 to 30 or 51015. I went downstairs and tried them both. The second one opened. The door swung out on its hinges and I held the flashlight inside. There were three things in the safe. The first was a metal cash box. I lifted it out and opened it. Inside were 46 United States savings bonds, Series E, issued between 1943 and 1951. Most of them were in denominations of $25 and $50. I knew from a quick search that these bonds had stopped earning interest decades ago, but they were still redeemable at face value, plus all the accumulated interest up to the date they stopped earning. I did some rough math. Even at the most conservative estimate, I was holding somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 in redeemable bonds. The second was a leather pouch containing a flat brass key and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a handwritten note in careful, old-fashioned penmanship. It said, "Third Pew, East Side, First Baptist, Warrenton. Deacon knows." I had no idea what that meant. I set the pouch aside. The third item was what changed everything. It was a legal-size envelope, sealed with wax that had long since dried to powder, addressed in the same handwriting to "Whoever finds this in good faith." I opened it carefully at the kitchen table that night, Claire across from me, Maisie long since in bed. Inside was a handwritten document, 12 pages, dated March 1962, signed by August Hale, and notarized by a notary stamp that was still clear and legible. It was a statement, a detailed, specific, annotated statement describing a series of land transactions in Vance County between 1948 and 1961, in which a man named Rudolph Voss, operating through two shell companies called Piedmont Rural Holdings and Blue Ridge Land Partners, had systematically defrauded at least 9 local farm families out of their land by filing forged deed releases and manipulating county property records. August Hale had been one of the defrauded families, but he was also a meticulous man. He had kept copies of the original documents, the real ones, before they were altered. He had corresponded with a county records clerk who became suspicious. He had documented everything over 14 years, including dates, names, transaction numbers, parcel IDs. He hadn't gone to the authorities. He wrote in the document that he didn't trust the authorities at that time in that place. He was right, not to. Voss had connections, but August Hale believed that the truth, properly documented, would survive him. He believed someone would find it eventually, when the time was right, when Voss was gone and the landscape had changed enough that justice could function. Voss had died in 1979, but Piedmont Rural Holdings had not died. It had been sold and restructured and renamed twice, and it still existed. I found it in the North Carolina Secretary of State's business registry in about 20 minutes of searching. Its current incarnation was a real estate holding company called Summit Valley Properties, LLC, which had been actively acquiring land in Vance County for the past 6 years. They had purchased 41 parcels. 3 of them, according to the parcel IDs in August Hale's document, were original Hale family land. land that had been taken through Voss's fraud in 1956. We were living on one of the other parcels, the one that August Hale had somehow held on to. I read August's document 3 times that night. I understood what I was holding. Not just a piece of history, a legal instrument, an original, notarized, witnessed statement with supporting documentation that had never been challenged in court because it had never been seen by a court. Claire looked at me across the table when I finished explaining. "What do we do with this?" she said. I said slowly, "we find a lawyer." The lawyer I found was a woman named Ms. Okonkwo, who specialized in property law and had a particular interest in historical land fraud cases. I emailed her a summary at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, not expecting to hear back quickly. She called me the next morning at 7:45. "Where did you find this?" she said, without saying hello. I told her. "Don't touch the safe," she said. "Don't move anything out of that room. I'll be there Friday." She drove up from Durham on Friday morning in a Honda Civic with a canvas tote bag full of files, and she spent 4 hours in that room with a camera and a laptop and a legal pad. When she came back to the kitchen table, she had a particular expression that I'd learned to read over the following weeks, the look of someone doing calculations that might turn out to be very large. "The bonds are yours," she said, "legally unambiguous. The safe was on your property, no other claimants. Get them appraised. I'd estimate 60 to 80,000, possibly more." "Okay," I said. "The document is more complicated, but not in the way you might think. It's not complicated because it's weak. It's complicated because it's strong." August Hale was thorough in a way that was genuinely unusual for a private individual. He understood documentation. He understood the difference between an assertion and a proof. "This is a proof. So what happens with it?" "What happens," she said, leaning forward slightly, "is that 3 families in this county may have legal claim to land that is currently held by a company worth approximately $60 million. And we now have a document, in the original, notarized in 1962, that tells us exactly how it was taken from them." What followed was 8 months that I can only describe as the longest and most exhausting and most clarifying period of my life. Miss Okonkwo traced the descendants of the 9 families named in August's document. 6 were locatable. Some had moved out of state. Some were elderly. One family had 3 adult children spread across 3 different cities who had never known anything about the land their great-grandmother had lost in 1953. We met with all of them. I was present for those conversations, and I won't pretend they were simple. There were people who cried. There was one man, 76 years old, who listened to the whole explanation and then sat quietly for a long time before he said, "My daddy used to drive past that land every Sunday and not say a word about it. Now I know why." Summit Valley Properties became aware of the investigation approximately 3 months in when a county title search triggered an inquiry. Their response was immediate and expensive. They hired a litigation firm out of Charlotte with 12 attorneys. The lead attorney sent Ms. Okonkwo a letter describing the claims as baseless, time-barred, and frivolous. Ms. Okonkwo wrote back a 4-page response that included scanned copies of August Hale's documentation and a citation list that ran to 2 pages. There was a very long silence from the Charlotte firm after that. The breakthrough came in month 6, when the State Attorney General's office, which had been quietly reviewing the materials Ms. Okonkwo had submitted, opened a formal investigation into Summit Valley Properties. It turned out that the fraudulent land acquisition pattern that Rudolph Voss had started in the 1950s had not actually stopped when he died. It had been quietly continued by his successors, with different methods but the same underlying approach. Exploiting weak county records, targeting heirs with unclear title documentation, acquiring properties below market value through pressure and occasional outright deception. The Attorney General's investigation uncovered 11 additional fraudulent transactions in the 20 years prior, completely unrelated to the original Hale document. Those were the charges that actually brought the company down. August Hale's records were the foundation, the proof of a pattern. The evidence that this wasn't a series of isolated transactions, but an intentional, ongoing practice. Summit Valley Properties entered into a settlement with the state 14 months after I first opened that safe. The settlement included restitution payments to 6 families totaling just over $2 million. It included the transfer of 3 parcels of land back to Hale family descendants. I was one of them, by the legal definition of successor in interest, since I had purchased the property in good faith and the courts treated me as having inherited August's claim. The parcel transfers were contested vigorously and ultimately resolved through a separate negotiation that I won't fully detail here, except to say that when it was done, we owned our 3 acres free and clear, the title was clean, and there was a check on the kitchen table for an amount that made Claire cover her mouth with both hands. The savings bonds came out to $73,000 once they were professionally appraised and redeemed. The note in the leather pouch, 3rd pew, East Side, First Baptist, Warrenton, Deacon Knows, turned out to reference a metal lockbox that August had left in the care of a church deacon in 1963. The deacon was long dead, but the current deacon knew about it. It had passed through 4 deacons over 60 years, each one told simply to keep it safe until someone came asking. Inside that box was a family Bible, a collection of photographs, and a letter from August Hale to anyone who found his hidden room, explaining why he had built it, what he had put inside it, and what he hoped might someday come of it. He wrote, "I am not a man of many words, but I am a man who believes that a wrong does not become right simply because time passes over it. I have buried the truth carefully because I know it is inconvenient. I trust that someone will find it when the finding can do some good. I trust this the way I trust the stone in these walls. Not because I can prove it, but because I built it to last." I read that letter standing in the little stone room off the utility space on a morning in October, exactly 2 years after we'd moved in. The room had been cleaned out by then, documented, photographed. We were going to seal it back up, mostly, and let it be what it was, a part of the house, a part of its history. Maisie came and stood in the doorway and looked in at me. "Are you okay, Dad?" "Yeah, bug," I said. "I'm okay. What does that paper say?" I folded it carefully and held it for a moment. "It says that August Hale was a good man who did something patient and brave, and that it worked out." She considered this. "Cool," she said, and went back to whatever she was doing. "The porch doesn't sag anymore. We rebuilt it last spring, cedar decking and square posts, a porch swing at the north end, where you can see the tree line in the morning. The kitchen has a real backsplash now, and a farmhouse sink that Claire found at an estate sale 3 counties over and drove home in the back of the minivan with the seats folded down. The hardwood floors in the main room catch the afternoon light in a way that I stop and notice sometimes when I come in from work, still in my work clothes, before I've washed my hands or said hello to anyone. August Hale built this house in 1944. He cut and laid the stone himself. He planted the boxwoods along the east wall. He built a hidden room and filled it with the most important thing he had, not money, not objects, but the truth, documented and preserved and left for a future he wouldn't see. I think about him sometimes, especially in winter, when the fireplace is going and the house is warm and the woods outside are dark and quiet. I think about what it must have taken to do what he did, to sit with an injustice for decades, to document it meticulously, to trust that it would matter someday to someone he'd never meet. He was right. We found it.